Okay, hello. Last time I spoke to you, we were out on Holy Island, out on site itself in the December gales, talking about the archaeology of the site and what we hope to do. What I want to talk about today is actually why we're digging, where we're digging, and why we want to dig there. The aim of the project is to find out where the Anglo-Saxon Monastery is. That's the thing that I'm really interested in. And obviously there's only so much we can see when you walk around the island. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we've used historic maps and geophysical survey and other techniques to actually home in on the sites we're going to put our holes in the summer. There's a stage of every archaeological project before we get into the field and do the fun digging. We like to plan ahead, we like to try and work out what we might expect to find, so there's no nasty surprises. And we do this by using old maps, old documents and geophysical survey. And they all help to tell us what might be in the place we're hoping to dig. This is a copy of the oldest map we have of Holy Island. It was made in the mid-16th century, just at the point when the monastery had been abolished. It shows Holy Island village, it shows the ruins of the priory, it shows the raised ridge of rock called the Hoof, but it also shows actually how many things have changed. In some of the filming we did for the last video, we were sitting down here in what this map shows used to be a large coastal lagoon. And one of the big ways the island has changed is that the harbour has got a lot smaller, and all this area which used to be water has become infilled and reclaimed land. Also over here, this is the site of Lindisfarne Castle, and you can see that in the mid-16th century there was no castle there. It's not a medieval castle, it's a much later castle. There was actually an even tinier little castle on the next rock which is now gone. So that reminds us that even since maybe the last 300-400 years, the landscape of the island has changed quite radically. This map was made to show the planned defences which were going to be built on the island after the abbey had been got rid of, because it was going to be turned into a military base against the threat of the Scots. So one of the problems we've got here is trying to unpick what was built and what was only planned. We've got things we know were standing. We've got the priory church, we've got the parish church, and these are the old buildings of the medieval priory. But also the map shows these later, probably artillery defences, and as far as we know they were never built. But on our geophysical survey we do have things lurking in this field, and it's possible that what we have seen on our geophysical survey might be related to these defences, or they might be related to something earlier, and that's the kind of question we can only answer by digging. This next map dates to 1791 and it's what's called an enclosure map. It was drawn at the point when the old medieval open fields were carved up and turned into private fields, and it's a point when we see the communal shared agriculture being privatised, and you can see a lot of the field boundaries and the names of the people who own them marked here. And again, this shows us partly how the landscape's changed, because we know in the medieval period that there was farming right the way up to the north of the island, but when the landscape was carved up as shown on this map, all this area became kind of common land and wasn't used anymore for ploughing, and there's still traces of that medieval ploughing under the sand dunes. Here we have the more detailed map of the village, and we can actually see the houses, and again we've got the church, the priory church and the Hoof. One of the big questions I'm interested in as an archaeologist, as I said, is trying to understand the layout and extent of the Anglo-Saxon monastery. Now they were much larger than medieval monasteries, later medieval monasteries. So this is the kind of enclosure for the later medieval monastery. I suspect the larger Anglo-Saxon monastery may have extended over much of what is now the village. And one of the things I'm interested in is trying to locate the boundaries of the monastery. There would have been clearly defined monastic boundaries in the Anglo-Saxon period. So when we did our geophysical survey, we did lots of geophysical survey down here, particularly up here. And one of the things we found in that work is a possible boundary ditch running through this field, coming onto this lane and coming down here. Now if you remember from the other map, in the earlier period all this was water, so actually our possible boundary ditch cuts off the whole headland. And one of the things we want to do with the excavation work is to test that and see whether that boundary is, as I hope it might be, Anglo-Saxon, or does it belong to some other period of use on the island. This next map is from 1850 and it's what's called a Tithe Map, and these were maps made for essentially for taxation purposes, and again it focuses in on Holy Island Village, and it shows very nicely all the individual houses, the roads with road names, field boundaries, and the area I'm particularly interested in is down here, where again we have the remains of the Priory Church, the Parish Church, and where we've done a lot of our geophysical survey. When we did the geophysical survey, an area we were particularly interested in was this area called Sanctuary Close, and we came up with all sorts of interesting features. Apart from anything, we found the remains of another cloister from the monastery, which no one really knew about, so that was nice. But again, our focus was primarily on trying to find the Anglo-Saxon site. And when we did the geophysics, we found lots of features all in this area, some of which may be the remains of buildings, some of which might be the remains of ditches. And we're hoping to put a trench in around here to try and find out what these are. Now, you might remember from the first map, there was lots of plans to build defences here in the 16th century. So we might be looking at the remains of at least the start of those buildings, or hopefully we might be finding the remains of maybe another Anglo-Saxon church, maybe buildings associated with the monastery of St Cuthbert. Again, this is a point where we actually have to dig to take our theories and hypotheses any further. So this is the most recent image we have, and it shows the plot of a geophysical survey which was carried out on the island by Durham University in 2012. All the grey areas are the areas which we looked at with the magnetometer. And it gives a sense of what we were trying to do. We were trying to look at as many of the green areas, the open areas in and around the village as we could. In this form, it looks a bit grey and speckly, but what we can do now is look at an interpreted version, an annotated version of his map, which will show us more clearly the things we found. The two areas that I've really been talking about are down here in the area of the Priory and the Parish Church. Over here we see a possible boundary feature, and this might be the boundary of the monastery. And you can see this boundary runs along and it meets up with this road and runs through the village up to the point where the sea once came to. So this is where we're going to put one of our trenches to test the date. What's interesting is south of this boundary there's lots of activity which might be related to something like metalworking or craft activity, so that's potentially quite an exciting area. The other area we're going to look at is this area to the east of the two churches, very much nice alignment, and again there's one building on the same alignment and other possible structures all in that area of the field. And again, these are the features we're hoping may turn out to be part of the Anglo-Saxon monastery. So there you have it. We've used the historic maps and the documents and some of our geophysical survey to try and home in on where we think the Anglo-Saxon monastery might be. So the next job is to obviously go and test this out in the field. So in June we're going to be out on Holy Island carrying out some excavation on some of the areas we've talked about to really see whether we've identified where the monastery was. Now there's going to be lots of chances for people to get involved with those excavations and other archaeology work on the island in the future. So at the end of February we're going to be making some announcements about how you might want to get involved. We'll be sharing the information on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll also be able to see on the video description below about how you can take opportunity to get stuck into the archaeology of Holy Island.